Regret is a silent burden that many carry, yet few dare to acknowledge. It lingers beneath the surface, tucked away in the corners of the mind, like a weight that never fully lifts. People often think that regret is something loud, something obvious, something that comes with a confession, an apology, or a desperate attempt to make things right. But the truth is, regret is more often silent. It is hidden behind a facade of indifference, masked by pride and buried beneath the layers of a carefully constructed exterior. Even when someone feels the full force of their mistakes, they may never admit it. Not to you, not to themselves, and certainly not to the world. A man who regrets his actions will not always show it in the way you expect. He won't always come knocking at your door, pouring his heart out, or sending a message admitting his faults. Instead, his regret will manifest in the quiet moments, the ones you may never even witness. It will be in the way his mind drifts back to the past when he least expects it. In the way a familiar song, a scent, or a place reminds him of what was. It will be in the restless nights, the thoughts that creep in when the distractions fade away. Regret does not always demand attention. Instead, it settles in the soul, gnawing at a person from within. The human mind is a complex thing designed to protect itself from pain. And what is regret, if not a form of pain? To admit regret is to admit failure, to confront the reality of one's own actions and choices. But not everyone is willing or capable of doing that. Many would rather bury their feelings, suppress their emotions, and convince themselves that they made the right decision, even when deep down they know they didn't. This is why regret is often silent. It is not because it does not exist, but because acknowledging it would mean facing uncomfortable truths. It is far easier to pretend. It is easier to act as if nothing was lost, to move through life as though everything is fine, as though there is nothing missing. But just because someone doesn't say they regret their choices, doesn't mean they don't feel it. Regret is not measured by words. It is measured by what happens in the quiet moments when there is no one to impress, no ego to protect, and no distractions to keep the truth at bay. A person carrying regret will replay moments in their mind over and over again, analyzing what they could have done differently. They will question their decisions, wondering if the outcome would have changed had they chosen another path. They will experience fleeting moments of clarity, moments where the truth breaks through their carefully crafted illusions, forcing them to confront the reality of what they lost. And yet, even in those moments, they may never speak a word of it. Silence does not mean absence of emotion. On the contrary, silence is often the loudest indicator of deep, unresolved feelings. When a person cannot bring themselves to talk about something, it is usually because that thing holds power over them. Regret is a powerful force because it serves as a constant reminder of what could have been. It is the weight of knowing that a different choice, a different action, or a different mindset could have led to a better outcome. It is a burden that follows a person even when they try to outrun it. There are those who will go to great lengths to avoid admitting regret, not because they do not feel it, but because doing so would require them to expose a part of themselves they are not ready to confront. They may distract themselves with work, with new relationships, with hobbies, or material things. Anything to avoid sitting alone with their thoughts for too long. They will fill their days with noise, their schedules with obligations, their minds with anything that keeps them from having to reflect on the past. Because in the stillness, regret whispers. For some, the weight of regret becomes unbearable and it begins to manifest in unexpected ways. It might be in the way they behave around you, in the way they hesitate before speaking, in the way they seem restless in their own skin. They might avoid certain conversations, certain places, or certain people that remind them of what they lost. Or they might overcompensate, acting as if they are completely unbothered, as if they have moved on without a second thought. But underneath the surface, the truth remains. Regret is not always immediate. Sometimes it takes weeks, months, or even years for a person to fully understand the gravity of their mistakes. The mind has a way of justifying actions in the moment, convincing itself that what was done was necessary or unavoidable. But time has a way of revealing the truth. With distance and reflection, a person may begin to see things differently. They may start to recognize the role they played, the choices they made, and the impact of their actions. And when that realization comes, regret follows closely behind. But even then, admitting regret is another battle entirely, because regret is tied to ego, and ego does not like to admit fault. To express regret is to acknowledge that one was wrong, that one made a choice that led to loss or pain. And for many, this is too difficult to accept. It is easier to suppress, to deny, to convince oneself that everything happened for the best, even when a part of them knows otherwise. This is why regret is often carried in silence. It is not because the person does not feel it, but because admitting it requires a level of honesty and humility that not everyone is prepared to embrace. And so they hold on to it, letting it sit within them, allowing it to shape their thoughts and actions in ways they may not even realize. Silence is often mistaken for indifference, but in reality, silence holds more emotion than words ever could. When a man carries regret, he does not always announce it, nor does he put it into words for the world to hear. Instead, it festers inside, buried deep beneath layers of pride, fear, and unspoken truths. People assume that if someone does not express their feelings, those feelings must not exist. But that assumption is far from reality. The loudest emotions are often the ones left unspoken, the ones that play out in the quiet spaces of the mind rather than in the open air of conversation. Regret has a way of making itself known without a single word being spoken. It lingers in the subtle changes in behavior, in the way a person moves, in the pauses between sentences that never quite make it out. It is in the hesitation before reaching out, in the moments where someone almost says something but stops themselves just before the words leave their lips. Silence does not mean there is no emotion. It often means there is too much emotion, more than a person knows how to handle. A man who regrets losing someone may not verbalize it, but he feels it. He may act as if everything is fine, as if he has moved on without a second thought. He may carry himself with confidence, go about his life as though nothing has changed. But behind closed doors, in the solitude of his own thoughts, regret whispers to him. It speaks in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night when there are no distractions to drown it out. It speaks when he scrolls through old memories, when he stumbles upon something that reminds him of what he once had. It is there when he watches someone else laugh the way she used to, when he hears a song that brings back a moment that once felt insignificant but now carries the weight of everything he lost. Regret does not always scream. Sometimes it is a quiet sigh, a moment of stillness where the mind drifts back to what was. It is in the way his eyes linger a second too long on a familiar face in a crowd. In the way he avoids certain places because they hold too many memories. It is in the subconscious habits, the ones he does not even realize he has picked up, checking her social media without liking anything, bringing up her name in passing conversations without meaning to, finding excuses to revisit old memories under the pretense of something else. The weight of regret is not measured in words. It is measured in the silent moments, the ones where a person is left alone with nothing but their thoughts. People assume that a man who does not express regret must not feel it. They believe that if he is not reaching out, if he is not asking for another chance, then he must be perfectly fine with how things turned out. But that is not always true. Many men carry their regret in silence, not because they do not feel it, but because admitting it feels impossible. Admitting regret requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires breaking down the walls that have been carefully built over time. For some, that is harder than living with the regret itself. Silence is a defense mechanism, a way to avoid confronting emotions that feel too heavy to bear. It is easier to pretend that regret does not exist than to sit with it, to analyze it, to fully acknowledge the depth of what has been lost. A man who remains silent in the face of regret is often one who is battling himself. He may tell himself he made the right choice. He may justify his actions, convince himself that moving on was the best decision. But no matter how much he tries to silence his own thoughts, regret finds its way in. It creeps up when he least expects it, in the moments when his mind is unguarded. Even when he appears unbothered, his body language tells a different story. He may stiffen when he hears her name, glance away too quickly when he sees something that reminds him of her. He may avoid conversations about the past altogether, or, on the contrary, bring her up more often than he realizes. Regret shows itself in contradictions, in acting unaffected while secretly hoping for a second chance, in pretending to have moved on while holding on to small fragments of the past. There is an internal conflict between regret and pride. To express regret is to admit that a mistake was made, that something valuable was lost. But for many men, pride does not allow them to say those words out loud. Instead, they suffer in silence, replaying the past in their minds, wondering if things could have turned out differently. They may try to move forward, to distract themselves with new people, new experiences, new habits. But no matter how much they try to suppress it, regret lingers. It does not disappear simply because it is unspoken. Some may think that time erases regret, that eventually it fades into the background and ceases to matter. But regret does not operate on a timeline. It does not always fade. Sometimes it deepens. As life moves forward and circumstances change, a man may come to see things differently. He may look back with clearer eyes, recognizing the mistakes he once refused to acknowledge. And when that realization comes, regret settles in even further. There is a common misconception that if someone truly regrets something, they will say it. They will reach out, apologize, try to fix what was broken. But the truth is, not everyone has the strength to face their own mistakes. Not everyone can put their ego aside and admit they were wrong. Some will spend their entire lives carrying regret in silence, never uttering their words out loud, but feeling their weight every single day. Silence is not the absence of emotion. It is often the heaviest expression of it. Regret is a force that does not simply disappear with time. It lingers, reshaping a person's thoughts and behaviors in ways they may not even realize. When a man carries regret, he does not always express it outright, but it finds its way into his actions. He may go about his daily routine, interact with others, and even engage in new relationships, but the past remains with him. He cannot erase the memories, nor can he fully detach from the emotions tied to them. The way he behaves, the way he reacts to certain situations, the way he navigates his life moving forward, all of these things are shaped by the silent weight of his regret. Regret manifests itself in the way he treats others, often without his conscious awareness. When a man has lost someone due to his own mistakes, he may attempt to fill the void by seeking out something or someone new. He may enter a new relationship believing that he can move forward, but deep down, he is still carrying the weight of what was lost. He may compare the new person to the one he left behind, measuring them against a standard set by a past that cannot be replicated. Even if he tries to convince himself that he is happy, there will always be a part of him that remembers what he once had. what he let slip through his fingers. Regret influences decision-making in ways that are often subtle but powerful. A man who regrets losing someone may find himself more hesitant in future relationships. He may become more cautious, more careful with his words and actions, afraid of making the same mistakes again. He may struggle with trust, either in himself or in others, because he knows what it feels like to lose something valuable. Alternatively, he may swing in the opposite direction, becoming reckless and detached, convincing himself that emotions are not worth the risk. He may adopt an attitude of indifference, telling himself that nothing lasts forever anyway. But no matter which path he takes, regret is still the driving force behind his actions. There are moments when regret surfaces unexpectedly, triggered by small, seemingly insignificant things: a familiar scent, a song playing in the background, a phrase someone says. Any of these can bring memories rushing back in an instant. When this happens, he may find himself retreating into silence, lost in thought. He may brush off the feeling, pretend it does not affect him, but his body will betray him in small ways. A sudden tension in his posture, a distant look in his eyes, a hesitation before responding. These are all signs of a mind weighed down by unspoken emotions. Regret can also show itself in patterns of avoidance. A man who carries regret often avoids certain places, certain conversations, and even certain people that remind him of his mistakes. He may stay away from mutual friends, ignore invitations to places where it's a form of self-betrayal. Every time you ignore your intuition, the part of you that knows deep down that this person doesn't truly care, you are betraying yourself. You are choosing temporary relief over long-term peace. You are choosing to prioritize their attention over your own well-being. And the worst part is, you know you deserve better, but something inside you is still holding on, still waiting for them to change, still hoping that one more text, one more effort will finally make them see your worth. But that's not how real connections work. Real connections don't require convincing. They don't require constant effort just to be acknowledged. And here's what happens when you finally stop. When you finally resist the urge to send that message, when you finally choose silence over chasing, you create space for clarity. You begin to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. You start recognizing that their lack of effort was never a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their own priorities. You start realizing that you were holding on to an illusion, to a version of them that only existed in your mind. And as painful as that realization is, it is also liberating. Because the moment you stop trying to force someone to care is the moment you set yourself free. When you no longer reach out, when you no longer try to reignite something that has already burned out, you regain control over your emotions. You stop allowing someone else's inconsistency to dictate your happiness. You stop waiting by your phone, checking to see if they've replied, analyzing their words for hidden meanings, hoping for some sign that they still care. You start redirecting that energy back into yourself, into your goals, your passions, your personal growth. And that is when you truly start to heal. The reality is people can sense desperation. They can feel when someone is seeking validation rather than engaging from a place of confidence. And that energy pushes them away. No one wants to feel like they are someone else's emotional lifeline. No one wants to feel like they are responsible for another person's happiness. That's why the more you chase, the less they care. The more you try to force a response, the less they feel inclined to give it. Because the moment they sense that their attention has become a source of control over you, they lose respect for you. But when you stop when you finally choose yourself over the need to be noticed, everything changes. You no longer feel the need to beg for attention because you realize that the right people will never make you beg. You no longer waste time overanalyzing their behavior because you understand that real connections are effortless. And most importantly, you no longer define your worth by someone else's willingness to reply to a message. That is the shift that changes everything. The moment you decide that your peace is more important than their attention, you take back your power. You start attracting people who genuinely appreciate you, not because you chase them, but because your self-respect makes you naturally magnetic. The less you seek validation, the more you realize that you never needed it in the first place. When you keep reaching out to someone who has already pulled away, you are doing more than just seeking attention. You are teaching them how to treat you. You are showing them that they can ignore you, dismiss you, and still have access to you whenever they please. This is where the real issue lies. Not in their lack of response, but in your willingness to keep giving them chances despite their indifference. People learn how to treat you based on what you tolerate. If you continue to engage with someone who does not prioritize you, you are silently communicating that their behavior is acceptable, that their absence does not have consequences, and that you will always be there no matter how they treat you. Respect is not demanded, it is inspired. It is earned through your actions, your self-worth, and the boundaries you set. If you respect yourself, others will have no choice but to respect you too. But when you repeatedly allow someone to come and go as they please, to treat you like an afterthought, you are showing them that they can have you without making any effort. And people do not value what is freely given without cost. They value what they must earn. When someone knows they can ignore your texts, disappear for days, and come back whenever they feel like it, they stop seeing you as someone important. You become an option, not a priority. They see you as someone they can entertain when they are bored, not someone they need to make time for. And the reason they continue to treat you this way is that you have allowed it. You have made it easy for them to take you for granted. What many people fail to realize is that the power dynamic in any relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, is not controlled by the person who chases, but by the person who is being chased. The one who constantly initiates, who constantly seeks attention, who constantly tries to maintain the connection is always at a disadvantage. They are the ones putting in all the effort, while the other person simply receives without reciprocation. This imbalance creates a dynamic where one person is valued less because they are too available, too eager, too willing to accept breadcrumbs of attention rather than demanding full respect. But the moment you stop, the moment you choose to no longer tolerate half-hearted efforts, you shift that power back into your hands. You force the other person to make a choice. Either they step up and match your energy or they fade away completely. And either way, you win. Because if they choose to step up, it means they recognize your value. But if they don't, it means they were never truly invested in the first place. And the sooner you realize that, the sooner you can stop wasting time on people who do not deserve you. There is a fundamental truth that too many people overlook. People respect those who walk away when they are not treated right. They admire those who have the strength to say, I deserve better, and actually mean it. When you finally decide that you will no longer accept being treated as an afterthought, you send a message, not just to them, but to yourself, that your time and energy are valuable, that you are not someone who will settle for less than they deserve. And here's where the real transformation happens. When you stop tolerating disrespect, You start attracting people who actually appreciate you. You begin to surround yourself with those who value your presence, not just your availability. You develop an energy that commands respect because people can feel when someone values themselves. Confidence is magnetic. Self-respect is attractive. When you know your worth, you no longer have to prove it to anyone. They just recognize it. But you can't reach that point if you keep allowing yourself to be an option. If you keep waiting for someone who only gives you the bare minimum. If you keep accepting apologies without changed behavior. If you keep chasing people who are not chasing you, you will never experience the level of respect you deserve. Some people think that being persistent will change things. That if they just keep showing how much they care, the other person will finally wake up and appreciate them. But real respect does not come from persistence. It comes from absence. From walking away when you are not valued. From refusing to participate in a dynamic that drains you. Think about this. When someone knows that losing you is a real possibility, they will either step up or step out. But if they believe that no matter what they do, you will always be there, they have no reason to change, no reason to respect you, no reason to make an effort. Your time, your energy, your love, these are not things that should be given away freely to those who do not appreciate them. They are privileges that should be earned by those who show up, who make an effort, who respect and value you. If someone is not willing to put in the effort, then they do not deserve access to you. This is why silence is so powerful. Because it forces people to decide what they truly want. It shows them that you are not someone who will beg for attention, who will settle for being ignored, who will continue reaching out when they have already pulled away. It teaches them that you have boundaries, and those boundaries demand respect. And here's the irony. When you finally stop tolerating mistreatment, when you finally choose yourself over their inconsistency, that's when people start noticing. That's when they realize they took you for granted. That's when they start wondering why you're no longer reaching out. Why you're no longer available, why you are no longer giving them your time and energy. Because people only appreciate what they can no longer have. But by then it won't matter. Because you will have already moved on, already elevated yourself to a new level of self-respect, already shifted your energy towards people and situations that truly align with your worth. And that is where true power lies. Not in seeking validation from others, but in recognizing that you never needed it to begin with. The moment you decide to stop reaching out, a shift happens, not just in your external world, but within you. It's not just about ignoring someone who has ignored you. It's about reclaiming the power you unknowingly gave away. Every text you sent, every time you reached out first, every time you waited anxiously for a reply that never came or came too late with little enthusiasm, you were chipping away at your own self-worth. It might not have felt that way at the time because in the moment, sending that message gave you hope. It made you feel like you were doing something instead of just waiting in silence. But what you were actually doing was reinforcing a belief that you had to fight for someone's attention, that you had to prove your value, that you had to remind them of your presence. When you stop, the silence feels deafening at first. You feel the discomfort of not knowing what's happening on the other side. Is this person thinking about you? Do they even care that you've gone silent? Will they ever reach out again? These questions flood your mind, and this is where most people break. They convince themselves that just one more text won't hurt, that maybe there was a misunderstanding, that maybe the other person is just waiting for a sign that you still care. And so they send another message, they initiate another conversation, they reopen a door that was already closing, only to find that nothing has changed. The response, if there even is one, is just as lackluster, just as distant, just as dismissive as before. And then they are back in the same cycle of wondering why they weren't met with the enthusiasm, the effort, the reciprocity they were hoping for. But if you resist that urge, if you sit with the discomfort instead of trying to escape it, something powerful happens. You start to realize that you don't actually need their response to feel complete. You don't need their validation to confirm your worth. You don't need them to acknowledge you to prove that you matter. The very act of not reaching out forces you to confront something deeper. The fact that your sense of value should never be tied to someone else's attention in the first place. This is where real transformation begins. At first, the silence may feel like rejection, but in reality, it is redirection. It is the universe, life, or whatever force you believe in showing you that this person was not meant to hold space in your life. That their lack of effort was not an invitation for you to try harder, but rather a sign that you were knocking on the wrong door. And when you finally accept that, when you finally let go of the need for them to notice your absence, you start experiencing a new kind of peace. The most interesting thing about human psychology is that people are wired to notice what is no longer easily accessible. When something is always available, it blends into the background, taken for granted, assumed to always be there. But the moment it is removed, the moment it is no longer within reach, it creates a void. One that people subconsciously begin to notice. This is why more often than not, the very people who ignored you before suddenly start showing interest when you go silent. When you stop texting, when you stop reaching out, when you stop making yourself available, they begin to wonder. They begin to notice. They begin to question why the energy they once expected from you is no longer there. And this shift in dynamic is not about manipulation. It's about reality. People naturally respect what they feel they might lose. But here's the key difference. When you truly embrace silence, when you truly step back, not to get a reaction, but to protect your peace, you no longer care if they notice. You no longer crave their response. You no longer seek their validation, because by then you have already healed enough to understand that someone's attention should never be something you have to chase. This is where your energy starts to change. This is when people begin to see you differently, not as someone desperate for attention, but as someone with self-respect, someone who knows their worth, someone who is focused on their own growth rather than waiting for others to acknowledge them. And ironically, this is when you become most attractive, not just in a romantic sense, but in all aspects of life. Because people are drawn to confidence. And the real beauty of this transformation, the moment you reach a point where you genuinely no longer care whether they notice or not, that is when you have won. That is when you have truly detached. Because now their attention or lack thereof has no effect on your peace. You no longer lose sleep wondering why they haven't texted. You no longer overanalyze their messages, trying to read between the lines for some hidden meaning. You no longer base your self-worth on whether or not they choose to engage with you. Instead, you start investing that energy into yourself. You start focusing on your own life, your own happiness, your own goals. And as you do, you realize just how much energy you were wasting on someone who was never giving you the same in return. You see how much power you were giving away, how much control you had surrendered over your own emotions. And once you take that power back, you never want to give it away again. There is a reason why the most confident, self-assured people do not chase, they attract. They do not beg for attention, they command respect. And this is not because they are playing games or trying to manipulate situations. It is because they genuinely understand their own worth. They know that they do not need to convince anyone to see their value. They do not need to constantly prove that they are worth someone's time. They simply exist in their truth, and the right people recognize it without needing to be reminded. This is why not texting again is more than just a strategy. It's a mindset shift. It's a declaration that you will no longer waste energy on those who do not prioritize you. It's a decision to stop chasing what is not meant for you. It's a realization that your worth is not measured by how much effort you put into getting someone's attention, but by how much self-respect you have to walk away when that effort is not reciprocated. When you finally stop reaching out, when you finally decide to step back and let go, something unexpected happens. You begin to rediscover yourself. You start to see all the energy you once poured into someone else. Energy that was wasted on unanswered messages and half-hearted responses. And you realize just how much of yourself you were giving away. And that realization can be both painful and liberating. Painful because you recognize how much time you spent waiting, hoping, and seeking validation from someone who never truly valued your presence. But liberating because for the first time in a long time, you see that you never actually needed them. You just needed to redirect that energy back into yourself. At first, you may feel restless. The silence may feel unfamiliar, uncomfortable even, because for so long you were in a habit of reaching out, of checking your phone, of waiting for a response that might never come. But as the days pass, as you start investing in yourself instead of chasing someone else, you begin to notice something incredible. You feel lighter. The weight of expectation, of anxiety, of waiting for their attention starts to lift. You wake up in the morning and instead of wondering if they've texted, you think about your own goals, your own plans, your own desires. This is where the shift happens. When you stop texting, when you stop waiting for their attention, you start reclaiming your own power. You begin to see just how much you were giving away, your peace, your self-worth, your confidence. And when you truly understand that, you realize that no one else was responsible for how you felt but you. You were the one who kept reaching out. You were the one who kept hoping. You were the one who allowed their inconsistent behavior to affect your emotions. But now you are taking control. And something else starts to happen. The more you focus on yourself, the more your energy changes. You no longer carry the weight of disappointment, the frustration of waiting, the insecurity of feeling like you weren't enough. Instead, you start feeling empowered, self-assured, grounded in your own worth. And people notice, not just the one you stopped texting, but everyone around you. Because confidence, independence, and self-respect are magnetic